Hi, welcome to another advanced Unity tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at mixing a few different animations together and get a character to sit down on another game object. So I'm in Mixamo, which is where we're going to get our characters from. If you want to know how to use Mixamo in more detail, then I suggest you go and look at the tutorial on the basics of Mechanim and Mixamo, tutorial that I did a few weeks ago. So we're in the environment here and I've got Sporty Granny. This is one of my favourite characters in Mixamo that I've used quite a lot for other tutorials that I've written in the past. Now Granny's going to be standing around idle, and then I want to click on a chair and she's going to walk over to the chair and then sit down on it. So in order to do that animation wise, she needs an idle animation. I've added this one on called Dwarf Idle, which I quite like. She's just standing around checking her fingernails. She then needs a walking animation. And this particular animation, if I untick this in place box, she will actually walk and move forward, which is what we don't want. We want to control that moving forward in our script. So I will always tick this in place box. And finally, when she's walked to the object, she's going to sit down on it. So there's a stand to sit animation, which looks like this. All right, so I'll add this to my assets and then I'll download that package and we'll switch back into Unity. All right, so I'm back in Unity and I've created a new 3D project and I've put in a plane, which is just a normal 3D plane, which I've got a tiled texture on. And if we just go into the assets folder, you'll see that I've put the Sporty Granny folder that downloaded from Mixamo, the entire folder, just drag and drop it into assets in here. I've also got a few chair objects that I'll be using later for Granny to sit on. These chairs I got from Turbo Squid and they were free. So if you type in chair into the Turbo Squid search, then you're going to find hundreds of free chairs that you can use. Okay, so this is Sporty Granny folder, and you can see here's our model, and we can drag her into the scene. And if I put her over here, we can see her with the camera. And I'll just also rotate her around so she's facing us by 180. All right, so currently this model, if we select it in the hierarchy, doesn't have an animator controller attached. So you can see that it's got this animator component ready to grab a controller, but there is no controller. So we need to create that controller. And the controller has the state machine in it for all of the different animations and how you go from one animation to the other, which was also covered in that basics Mechanim and Mixamo tutorial. So we can go into project. I'm going to put this in the assets and go create animator controller, which is here, and we'll call this Granny. Okay, and I will double click on that to open it up in here. So this is our state view of all the different animation states that we can put onto our character. Going back into the Sporty Granny folder, we'll find our animations here. So this is the idle one. If you just click on it, you'll be able to see just underneath what it was called, because there's not enough room to give you the entire name here. Now we're going to put her into idle to begin with. So the first state that you drag into the animator window will go orange, which means it's the default animation. So the character will go straight into this, and we can check that by if I select Granny in the hierarchy and drag this new controller, it's the one with the little boxes and the play triangle on it, and put it into here. Okay, so this is now controlling Granny's animations, and what we build in here will be controlling the animations. So if I run this, Granny will go into idle. Okay, so the idle ran, but notice it didn't keep running because we haven't told it to loop. So to do that, if we go back and find our animations, this is our idle animation. If you select it and look over in the inspector at the properties for it with the animation tab selected, and just go down a little bit underneath this timeline, you'll see a loop time box. Tick that and tick this loop pose. That will now have that animation play over and over again until you actually do tell it to stop. And if we apply that and then run again, and watch what happens, is this is the first time the loop runs. She checks her fingernails and then it plays it again. So she will just continue looping over through this until we tell her to do something else. Now the next animation that we want to play is the walking animation. This one I've got selected here is our stand to sit, which I do want, so I'm just going to bring that in anyway. I'm going to use that in a moment. And also the walking in place. I'll just drag that in as well. Okay, now if I set walking in place to the default, which I can do by right clicking, and it will go orange. So when we press play, we can expect that the walk animation will now go. Notice it's also paused at the end. It doesn't continue to cycle. When Granny is walking, we want it to cycle because we're not sure how many times it needs to play before she gets from where she's currently standing to the particular object that we're going to sit on. So back in this Sporty Granny folder, if we find the walking animation, we can then in the inspector also set its loop time and pose and apply that as well. And if we play it again at this point, the walking animation is going to loop, so she'll just keep moving along. All right, so now she needs to go from idle to walking and then to sitting on an object. Okay, so we're going to make some transitions that we will then code to activate them. So let's go right click on the dwarf idle or your idle. We're going to set that back to our default state, and then right click again and go make transition and drag the arrow down to walk in place, and that will activate this walk in place. And then we're going to go from walk in place and add another transition. We're going to run the stand to sit. Now if we run it at this point, dwarf idle will run, it will then transition to walking, and then it will transition to sitting. So the whole three animations will play all at once because there's nothing currently stopping these transitions from happening. So let's just take a look. If I run it, we'll get one idle loop, it'll then go into walk, and then it will go into sitting down. Now, we only want these transitions to actually fire when certain conditions are met. So we're going to create some triggers, and we do that over here. Up the top, there's a little layers and there's a parameters box. In parameters, click on the plus sign and then go down and select trigger. Now this first trigger is going to be called is walking. Like that. Okay, do not click this little box because that will mean it's automatically triggered immediately. Then we're going to create another trigger and we're going to say is sitting, like that. Okay, now these two triggers we're going to put on these two transitions. So click on the transition between idle and walking, and then it'll turn blue. In the inspector, we can see that there is a conditions list right down the bottom. We're going to add a condition, and it's going to just automatically say is walking because that's the first one in the list. You can easily change what it is by clicking on this, but we happen to want it to be is walking. Now, we also want this transition to have a condition, which will be is sitting. And if we go over to conditions, we can add a condition and make it is sitting. Now, because these transitions have those conditions on them, when we press play, the idle will just run and keep running over and over again. So something needs to trigger this and then this in order for these animations to play. Okay, so that thing that is going to trigger these animations to play in a particular sequence is going to be a cube. So let's go back to this scene, and I'm going to add an object, 3D object cube, into the scene. And let's just move it up so we can see it. All right, so it's just a stock standard Unity cube. The technique we're going to create is a smart object. We're going to make this cube clever. When we click on the cube, it's going to order Granny to walk over and sit down. That means we can then add this cube onto anything and have that same functionality so that Granny can go and sit on anything that this cube happens to be copied onto. This is a similar technique that's used in The Sims. The Sims have so many different objects that the characters can interact with that the knowledge about how the animations run for interacting with that particular object belongs with the object. And the Sims are practically all the same height and the same sort of body structure and that as well, that the animations tend to be the same. So I'm like, if you click on a saxophone, the character goes and plays a saxophone with the playing saxophone animation. Or if you sit on a chair, they go sit on a chair. That type of thing. And that all lives with the objects, which is the way we're doing it here. All right, so what I'm going to do now is to create a script that we're going to drop onto this cube. So back in the assets, I'm going to go create a C# script, and I'm going to call that sit on. Nice and simple. Okay, so here it is. This is the default of what you get. Just shut this window here. And this code is going to be attached to the cube, and it's going to trigger all of those transitions that we've programmed in. Now I've already written this code, so I'm just going to paste it into here and then we'll go through it. So the first thing that we have in this sit on is a public game object character, and this is where we tell the script about Granny. We then have another very important variable, an animator. I'm going to call it anim, which is nice and easy to type. And this will hold that animation controller of Granny's. And we actually get hold of it down in the start function just here. Okay, so it grabs the character's animator and puts it in here so that we can use it later. Now, we also are going to set a Boolean value of is walking towards and have it equal to false. And we'll use this later in the update loop to determine if the character is going to walk towards that particular object. All right, so the next thing we have is a function that is going to be alerted when you click the mouse on the cube. So we use the onmousedown function, and you can see here that through the animation controller, we're going to trigger that is walking trigger that we created. Now, what's very important to take note of here is this, the way you spell this is exactly the same way that you've spelt the parameters in the animator. So when I put in is walking, I had a capital W. You need to have a capital W in here as well. Otherwise, you're going to get some error saying parameter doesn't exist. Okay, now we've clicked on the object, we've set the trigger, and we're also going to set our little Boolean value to true as well, so that we know that this script has started to run and is moving the character towards the object. All right, so let's go down to update. The start, we'll just skip over because that just grabs hold of the character's animator. Right, the update function is actually quite short. All it needs to do is orchestrate the running of those animations in sequence while it is also moving Granny towards the object to sit on. So it doesn't need to run all the time. It's only going to run if is walking towards is true. And this is only going to be true if we've clicked on the cube. So we start by nesting all of our code inside of an if is walking towards. The next few lines, so these ones here, might look familiar. If you've created a lot of games where you're moving a character around on the screen, or even in artificial intelligence when you've got NPCs that need to turn and chase other characters. What this is doing is it's rotating the character towards the target object, which is these lines here, and then this quaternion slurp. Now we're going to use slurp in this case so that it will gradually turn Granny towards it. Let me make this window bigger so you can see that entire line. So we're going to gently rotate Granny towards the cube, whilst at the same moving her forward. So it'll give a more natural appearance, as she won't just snap around and face the cube and then walk towards it. She'll actually walk in a circular motion. Okay, then this will keep running and she'll keep moving forwards until we're less than 0.5 away from the cube. So we're doing a distance check between the character's position and the cube's position. And if we're nice and close, we're then going to go in here and we're going to trigger the is sitting animation. Now, at the same time we trigger this, we're going to snap the character around so that the character's rotation is equal to the cube's rotation, so that they're facing in the same direction. So if you can imagine, if I could just go back to here, that Granny's going to walk towards this a bit more elegantly than that, and then she's going to turn around and then sit down, because you don't walk up to a chair and then sit down. You actually have to turn around first. So by aligning the cube's forward vector, and if we just zoom in here, you can see this is the cube's forward vector. We want to align that with Granny's forward vector, which is this one here, the yellow one now that I've selected it. And that means that she will turn around and face the other direction before she sits down. Now, that is actually very important to do that step. Okay, now once she's done that, we've already triggered this is sitting, so that's going to make the sitting animation happen automatically. And then we're going to set is walking towards back to false, which is going to stop this from continually triggering over and over again. And this won't become true until we sit down here. Okay, now one little thing that you might want to improve on is this rotation here. So this is actually snapping Granny around from facing the cube to facing away from the cube before she sits, which will be immediate. It's not going to slurp like this walking up here, which is a more gradual. So you could put some other code in here that just makes her rotate slowly around on the spot and then sit down. But I'm a bit lazy, so I haven't done that here. The other thing this code is not doing is that if you click on the cube while she's walking towards it or while she's sitting down, it's going to start a whole bunch of triggering again that you probably don't want to do. So you might need to set another bool. And let's call it sitting on, and let's set that to false. Oh, can't spell sitting. Right, sitting on, set that to false, and then at this point down here, we're going to set sitting on equals to true, so that she is sitting on it. Now, if she's sitting on it, then we don't want this code up here to actually trigger. So if sitting on, which will be not, if not sitting on, I keep missing out on that G, right? And then just put this in here. Right, if we're not sitting on the object, then we can start our process of sitting on. Otherwise, if we have already sat on it, we obviously can't sit on it again. So that's good. Let's save that. Let's go back to Unity. We're going to attach sit on to our cube object. There. Now if we select the cube, we can just check that it's attached over in the inspector, which it is. Now it wants to know about the character, which is Granny. So we'll grab Granny from the hierarchy and drag her into here so that the cube now knows about it. Right, I'm going to move this cube over a bit and put it here where we can see it. Now remember that the cube is now facing the Z axis, is facing towards. So she's going to sit down. This will be the front of the chair on this side. Right, so let's run it and have a look what happens when we click on the cube. She's going to turn around and she walks over to the cube, and then what's happening? So she's kind of stuck walking towards the cube. That's what's happening here. It's because of the test in our code that tests if she's close enough to the cube. So one way to fix this is to adjust the values with the walking forwards and with this test here. See, she keeps overshooting this 0.5 distance as she's moving along because of this translate constantly happening. So she never gets to be less than 0.5 close to the chair. So we can increase this value to sort of help that. And I'll just save that. Now another way you could also have her move forward is to use a lerp, which will have her move to the exact same location as the object, because a lerp linear interpolates between one point and another and moves an object to that exact point. The only problem in using the lerp is that it's not moving the character in a forward direction along its forward vector, in which case this slurp wouldn't actually work because she'd be turning around but moving in a straight line sort of sideways at the same time. So I guess that's up to you how you kind of deal with that. But for me, the easiest way now is just to increase the distance that we're going to have to the cube before she sits down. Right, so we've saved that and switch back and just run it again. And she'll turn when I click on the cube. So I'll just zoom in here. The other thing you might have noticed is that she slides, so the animations don't start immediately. And then she sits down here. Okay, so that's going to work for us when we position that cube onto a chair object. Okay, so to get her to start walking immediately, if I just run this again, rather than the sort of sliding around that you see here and then the walking happens, is because it's wanting to complete these animations before it transitions to the next. So you can force it to stop an animation and go straight on to the next in the animation controller. So if we have a look at the dwarf idle animation and the transitioning to walk, you'll see just above the settings box, there's this has exit time and it's ticked. Now, if you untick that, it will stop the idle animation from completely finishing before the walk does. Now, we should do that also with the sitting down as well. And okay, so now if we run it and we just go back to the scene view so you can see what's happening from a distance, is when I click on this, she goes straight into walk without the sliding around business happening, and then she gets to the cube and she sits down. All right, so she's not actually sitting on this cube. We're using this cube as a kind of a placeholder that holds onto the code and positions where she's going to sit. All right, so now we need something to sit on, and I'm going to bring this chair in. Here's this nice chair. Put it over here. And let's just zoom in on that in the scene. We're going to grab our cube and we're going to put that on our chair and rotate it around so that the chair's forward vector is going to be aligned with where Granny's going to sit down. Now remember, in this case, she's actually sitting down towards the back of the cube. Let's just go up a bit so I can see what's happening from above. And I wanted to kind of maybe sit there like that, which may work for us. Now, you've got this cube working, so you could actually attach it to that chair so that when you move the chair around, it will go with it and it belongs to it. You don't want to see a big ugly cube sitting there, so let's just turn off the mesh renderer for it so that all you see is the chair. And let's run it. Okay, and we will now click on the chair. Oh, sorry, in the game. Granny will wander over towards it. She snaps around and then sits down. Now, she's not quite aligned perfectly at that point. Okay, so we want to grab that cube, where is it there, and bring it this way a little bit. Have another play. So remember, it's the collider on that cube that she's sitting on. There we go. Not too bad. You can mess around with the actual chair itself and the position and the size of the chair, and the same with the cube. Right, so we can attach this cube to that chair. And now if we duplicate that chair and we move it around, put another chair over here, and just rotate that around like so. What I'm just going to do is check that the cube here that's attached to the chair knows about Granny. Okay, remember, whenever you copy that cube around and attach it to other objects, you'll need to make sure that the script knows about the character you're wanting to sit on it. All right, so let's just run it. And this time I'll click on this chair and she will wander over and sit down. All right, so that's the end of this tutorial. Of course, when she gets up from one chair and has to sit on another, then you need to have other transitions. You're going to have a from sitting to standing animation. So that your script is going to check if she's sitting on something, then she needs to stand up before she starts walking to something else. But it's the same process with the triggers and your script. Okay, so I hope you found that helpful for putting a set of different animations together and smart objects that will then trigger that behavior. And it's exactly the same principle if you want a character that moves to a wall and there's a ladder there and then they start climbing up the ladder. It's exactly the same thing. You click on the ladder and then they will climb up it when they reach it. And you can also use the collider that you've got the animation controlling code on to trigger other animations as well, so that once the character gets inside that collider and triggers it, it will then go into a different animation, such as climbing up a ladder, for example. Okay, so I hope you found that helpful and enjoyed watching it. It was a lot of fun actually making it and playing around with Sporty Granny again. And I'll talk to you again soon.